Hello, everybody. Welcome to an interview we have today with Laura Petherbridge. She is also known as the Smart Stepmom. In fact, her website is also thesmartstepmom.com, has written several books on stepmomming. And today we wanted to talk a little bit about abuse in the church and why that is not accepted as a problem by churches, as well as some other topics. So Laura, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, I'm Laura Petherbridge. I am a full-time author and speaker, and I've been doing that full-time now for since 2003. I did it part-time before that, and so even though I do write on stepmoms and step families primarily now, I did spend 30 years in divorce recovery ministry, still do divorce recovery. And that's really where I encountered the most significant people, women that were dealing with abuse issues. And so that's really where my knowledge on the subject came from was my years in divorce recovery.
Mhm. Did that surprise you, Laura, when you were working on divorce recovery and teaching people and it started coming out that abuse was an issue and the reason that some of these people have had to move on from their marriages?
I don't think it was a surprise because I had numerous girlfriends in my teens and 20s that had abusive boyfriends. I never had a boyfriend that hit me, but now looking back, I do know that I suffered emotional abuse from some of them. But it wasn't when I got into divorce recovery where I was shocked that there was no help for these women in the church. And some of the answers they got from the leadership kind of really like took me by surprise. Like, really? And so that's when I started leading divorce recovery is when I began to understand there's a brokenness here within the body of Christ of where we're not addressing this issue as Christ would do, as Jesus would do.
Mhm.
So yeah, it that's when my eyes were really open to it.
Mhm. Yeah, it's such a frustration. I have about half the gals that attend the Her Journey groups that I teach that have had a negative experience with either their pastor or their Christian counselor or somebody in leadership that they really trust spiritually, who has actually used those words, you need to submit more, or you need to pray more, or have you tried fasting? I had one call me last week that what she heard was you just need to go home and be a better wife, and that will fix things, that will fix the abuse. We often hear things like forgiveness as well. Well, have you forgiven him? If you forgive him or her, whoever the abuser is, then you're all you're free and clear, right? That stops the problem, and that is just not the case. So glad that you agree with us on that point that we have a lot of work to do, and I've seen some churches improve, fortunately, and I just want to see more improve. I want everybody to get to that point where they know it's there and they're educated about it and they know how to respond appropriately,
Yes,
instead of
absolutely.
traumatizing people. So why do you think that in general the church has such a tough time even admitting that there is abuse, and responding to it correctly? Why do you think that might be the case?
Well, there's actually, in my opinion, a multifaceted answer to that question. And it goes in, ironically, it goes in numerous different directions.
Mm.
So the first I would say is most pastors are well intentioned. And by the way, I am married to a pastor.
Me
And
too.
he is a retired pastor at this point. So I am not throwing pastors under the bus.
Yes.
Pastors have a very, very hard life. They live in a fishbowl. They're constantly receiving criticism. So I don't want anybody to interpret this as that I'm bashing pastors because I am not.
Yeah.
But I do believe most pastors are well intentioned. They have a good heart. They went into the ministry, because they have a good heart,
Mm.
because they love Jesus. And I think they just have never been educated
Mm.
on this particular subject.
Mm.
They took classes, in seminary or whatever that talked about marriage,
Mm.
and the focus was on love and respect. how to love each other, how to respect each other. But they got almost no training on what to do when one spouse is abusing another spouse. So that's one factor. They just don't know what they don't know.
Mhm.
The other factor is when they do sort of go, you know what, this is really broken. There's very little places for them to go to get trained
Mm.
or educated on what's the healthy way to respond to this.
Mhm.
Because the church typically leans to one side. And when I say the church, I'm talking the entire body of Christ that believes in Jesus and follows his word. We either lean to a very mamby-pamby, oh, if everybody's happy, we're okay, theology, or we go all the way over to the other theology of where we're legalistic and beating everybody up. And so when we try to blend truth and grace, which is exactly what Jesus did,
Mhm.
that is the hardest part of the Christian life, in my opinion.
Mhm.
I've been a Christian 40 years now, and the hardest part is continuously asking Jesus, give me that perfect balance between truth and grace, because my personality leans towards truth. See, we each have in our personality, we each lean, and so do churches. Churches are just like people. They have areas of strength and areas of weakness. And so we often have a church that is either top heavy on grace or top heavy on truth. And see, when we lean too far one way or the other, nobody wins because it's not Jesus. It's not the way Jesus disciples. It's not how he teaches us.
Mhm.
And so that is the second answer to that, is that they just don't know how to find that perfect balance.
Mhm.
The third answer to that, and I'm going to get into deep hot water here because there are going to be some people that are going to misunderstand what I'm going to say. So let me just preface that by saying, make sure you're listening to my words and not assuming I'm saying something else. The other reason is we have made an idol out of marriage in the church. Now, what I mean by this is when we idolize something, we place it before God. We place it before truth. We place it before anything else in our life. We worship it. And the church, in many situations, idolizes the sanctity of marriage to the point of where we tell people things that are unbiblical in order to preserve that idol.
Mhm.
And so, in other words, what you just said, when we tell a woman who is being abused by her spouse that her job is to just go home and ignore it, and that's really what all those things were that you just said. What we are, the translation of that is, marriage needs to be such an idol in your home that you ignore sin. That you should ignore the sin that is in your home and coming from your spouse. You're supposed to go, no, 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 that's not happening. So that we stay legally married. And that is a sin. So I get in trouble when I say that because people misunderstand it all the time. They assume I'm soft on marriage and they assume, or soft on divorce, and they assume I'm saying you can throw your marriage away really easily. That is not at all what I'm saying. What I am saying is God never tells us to ignore sin, in particular in our own home.
Mhm. Yeah, so true. And Jesus never ignored it.
Nope.
But he certainly didn't address it in a, judgmental attitude. He was compassionate and full of love for people. He would tell them, he was blunt. He would say, go and sin no more. But it wasn't without the love portion of it, reaching out to them and pulling them off the ground or whatever, to show his great love. So Yeah, the first time I heard about, the institution of marriage being more important to the church than the marriage itself was in a book called We Too, and it's by Mary DeMuth. And I was on the launch team for that, so I pre-read that, had the privilege of pre-reading that and commenting and reviewing it. And Mary DeMuth really feels, and this is more towards sexual abuse, her book is, and her experiences as well. But she really feels like the reason churches are losing membership is because of the responses that these people are getting when they come to leadership, with an abuse situation or needing healing. And that's actually the reason why women in particular numbers have dropped in actually attending churches. And so it affects more than the person who's going home to the abuse. It affects the bottom line of the church too, if indeed the church is losing membership, over that component.
That's right. And not only membership, but credibility.
Right.
We may still have people in the pews, but if the community knows, if my neighbor knows that I've invited them to church, but they go to my pastor, or they go to a counselor on my church staff, or, associated with my church, and that therapist tells them to just ignore that, you just need to be nicer, you just need to be more respectful, you just need to give him more sex, and he won't do that anymore. Mm-hmm. She's going to be like, what the heck is this? This is terrible. This is, you're telling me I'm just supposed to ignore this? And you see, we are not portraying the truth of the gospel when we do that. So I 100% agree with Mary. Mm-hmm. I love Mary. I've read her stuff. We've known each other for years as writers, and I love her material. And she says it so beautifully.
She does. Yeah, I think really had to work on her own healing, to get to a point where she leads so many others, in that direction, which is great.
Yes.
So have you worked with gals or guys that, due to that experience of the church's response to abuse in their life or the situation in their life, are now anti-church, don't want to attend church anymore in general? Have you had that?
As a matter of fact, just the other day, excuse me, just the other day, I was having a conversation with a stepmom who had come to one of my events, mm-hmm. and she was married to an abusive man. And she went to her church leadership, and this was the advice that she was given. Mm-hmm. Just ignore it and just respect him more and just be kinder to him and just submit more and just give him more sex, and then you'll be being a good wife then, and God will honor you and you'll be all right. Mm-hmm. And she just couldn't do it anymore. That was the answer she was getting. And she was like, I know in my gut, this isn't right. Mm-hmm. And she is now believing in a progressive Christianity. Mm-hmm. She has now hopped off. She blamed evangelical Christianity for those answers. And she pointed to a few leaders in my discussion with her, who I would 100% agree with her, mm-hmm. are throwing women under the bus, who are perverting what God says marriage is supposed to be. And it turned her so off, not only turned off, it broke her heart. Mm-hmm. It broke her. It broke her belief. She hasn't stopped believing in Jesus. She has completely stopped believing in the church. Mm-hmm. So she jumped all the way over to a progressive church who is completely perverted the gospel in a different way. She's still getting a perverted gospel. Mm-hmm. She's just now getting we're not held accountable for anything gospel. Now she's getting the opposite extreme. As long as you're happy, that's all that matters.
Right.
That many paths lead to God. And, she's getting a completely, still a perversion of who Jesus is. Mm-hmm. And boy, oh boy, isn't Satan having a picnic? Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, he is doing the Irish jig over this situation with this girl, because he used the body of Christ mm-hmm. to push her over into lies of progressive Christianity. If that doesn't scare us half to death, then I don't know what to say. Because we try to blame. We say, oh, it's because they don't want the truth. It's because they don't want the truth of the gospel. It's because they don't want to follow Jesus and what Jesus teaches, that they hop over to a soft gospel, a progressive gospel.
Mhm.
Take a look at this woman. If someone would have taught her the truth about marriage
Mhm.
and helped her the way Jesus would have helped her and given her tools on how to set boundaries with her husband, so that he either chose, I'm either going to stop abusing my wife or I'm going to lose her.
Mhm.
That was the answer to that.
Mhm.
Learn how to set a loving, healthy boundary that says, I am not going to let you treat me this way anymore. I don't deserve it. Jesus paid too much for me to allow you to treat me like this. And I am not, when you do that, I'm going into the other room. When you do that, I'm going to sleep in the other bedroom. When you do that, I'm removing myself from the situation. When this occurs, this is going to be my response. Not mean, hateful, retaliatory, none of that.
Mhm.
It's a loving, healthy no. And Jesus said no to people all the time. But see, we don't teach women that they're allowed to do that in a marriage situation where there are sinful, abusive things occurring. We tell them, shut up and put up.
Mhm.
And that drove this woman. I'm telling you, I'm still weeping for her. I pray for her because I pray that she got enough of the gospel
Mhm.
that she'll know how to come back.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Well,
they are the reason
yeah.
she left.
Yeah. We'll pray for that as well. And the hundreds and thousands I think there is out there of people who have gotten a response from the church that could have, gone better. Back to what you were saying about Jesus's love being balanced. We do teach that in her journey, that true love is a balance between both the mercy and the accountability. You can't have one without the other. And if you do
That's
have
right.
one without the other, then you're not modeling, the truth of God's love and what the Bible says, that love truly is. So those are important components. As far as education for pastors, we highly agree. And so that's why we do offer that here at ARMS for pastors and church leaders and staff members. We'll do a webinar, we'll come visit, we'll do Zoom for anything from basic domestic violence training to what should your response be? The do's and don'ts when somebody comes to you and says, I'm afraid I'm being abused in my marriage, or maybe they don't use that word. Maybe they say, I don't feel very respected by my husband, or maybe they say, I get nervous when he comes home, from work at night, or whatever the case might be. We have training for all of that, as well as some pretty intensive online 13-week training for people who really want to do advocacy or be trained in leading our groups as well. So hopefully, slowly but surely, the word is getting out that the church plays a very important role when these women first come out, and when these men, as Laura and I are talking here, just so you know, we do understand that men are victims as well, and survivors, but the reason we use mostly females because the majority of victims are female, but we do understand that happens as well. So Laura, what do you think we could do to change that? I mean, okay, now we have books out there. We have Mary's book, which is a great book, the We Too book. I see individual pastors within their churches at times want to make changes, and that's wonderful. But here's an example. A few months ago, we called some local churches that are local to us to talk to them about the training we have available. And there was a church, they picked up the phone and they flat out said, we don't have an abuse problem. Well, I went to their website and looked at their staff. They have all 50 elders listed, all their staff members, and every single one of them is a man. There is
Yep.
not a female in the entire bunch. And so I know there's good men out there too, but it also explains why he might be picking up the phone saying we don't have an abuse problem in our church, which is not true, because we know, unfortunately, that the stats are the same. Whether you're in the church or out of the church, it's still the 3 in 10, women that have been, almost 4, that have been affected by abuse in their lives. So from what you've seen, what would be a way that we can help improve that situation? What's a recourse?
Well, I think a church is either teachable or they aren't.
Mm.
There's not really a whole lot you can do to break through that wall. And again, their heart might be right. They might just be naive, or they're so into Christianese
Mhm.
that they don't know what's going on in the world. If it makes you feel any better, I get the same response about step families.
Mm.
We don't have any step families in our church.
Mm. Interesting.
And I'm like, okay, there are now statistically the last data on this is 2010. That was the last time the surveys, all the surveys asked that question. Um, they projected that by 2017, there would be more step families in the United States than there would be first time
Wow.
marriages. And that does not include people who cohabitate as a step family. That's just marriages. So when you add people who cohabitate as a step family, because the majority of step families live together before they marry, if they ever marry, they're terrified of marriage now because often one of them, at least, has been divorced in the past. Imagine the number of step families in the United States today. And so, I find with those churches, they either their interest is piqued and they are either teachable to hear more. Now, sometimes for me, showing them statistics,
Mhm.
a census, something like that, will help a little bit. It's also advantageous if when I share with them, there are many step families in your church, they're just pretending they aren't step families
Mm.
because they don't tell. They pretend they're a biological family because there's shame associated with being in a step family.
Mm.
So my guess is it's the same for women who are in an abusive marriage.
Mhm.
In particular, if they're being told, or their women's Bible study, or everywhere they hear it's her fault that she's experiencing this. So those women are never going to come forward. And here's the big fallout that has occurred. Because women in the church sometimes have become so feminist, instead of wanting help for this abuse problem, they then turn into, I am woman, hear me roar,
Right.
And that is a total turn off to the men.
Mhm.
We get labeled, when we do that, we get labeled as a Jezebel who won't submit to a man. We get labeled as a woman who's trying to dominate her home. We get all these labels, in particular, if you're like me and you have a strong personality. Like I have a very strong personality. My husband is exceedingly introverted. All the church pastors and that always assumed, well, Laura wears the pants in that family. It's totally untrue.
Mhm.
He's way more controlling than I am.
Huh.
He's just quiet.
Mm.
You can be quiet and controlling.
Yes.
Now, we've talked about this a lot. I'm not throwing him under the bus.
Yeah.
And do I voice my opinion? Absolutely. But has God taught me over the years what submission really means? What it means to be more quiet? What it means to listen more to my husband? What it means to respect him? I didn't grow up with that. I came from a divorced home myself. I knew nothing about what respecting your husband looked like. So did God have to teach me that? Absolutely. But when we women come on with this, I'm a warrior, I'm a woman, I'm a feminist, when we come with that, we're causing more damage to women's image in the church than we are, because they assume, oh no, we can't open Pandora's box and let them have some power because then they're going to take over. And it is this incredibly fine line between being a good, godly female voice that is respectful and loving and nurturing our husband, and being kind to our husband and not trashing our husband and not being a wallflower in the corner that lets somebody walk all over you. It is so hard in the church today to be this godly balance of what God really calls us to be. And, many with pastors, when I go and speak somewhere, I can tell usually within 10 minutes whether this pastor is going to dislike me because I have a strong personality. Doesn't matter what I believe in, what I do, what I say, but because I have a strong personality, some of them will automatically turn on me. And the ones who maybe they have a wife who's got a strong personality, and so they're like, yeah, I know I'm married to a strong woman, so I get it. And they're more gracious. That doesn't mean they're being, a wimp, or that they're letting their wife rule the roost. It just means they've grown to understand how Jesus treats women and how Jesus views women. And so to those pastors, I would say, if you don't have any abused women in your church, I would start asking myself, why? You don't have any step families in your church? I would start asking, why? What are you doing that they don't feel welcome to come there? Because certainly Jesus walked amongst those who were being abused, mistreated, poor, beaten, cruelty. If all I've got is people like me, what am I doing wrong?
Right.
So that would be my answer to that. But I can always tell whether they're teachable, usually within about 10 minutes. Okay. I can say, would you like to know more? Would you like to understand how to bring step families into your church, or how to, address this issue of abuse? Would you like to know more? And their reply usually lets me know whether that's something God's working on them or it isn't.
I appreciate that. Yep, absolutely. And the other thing sometimes we tend to hear as we get a little bit too feministic is that there's no good men, right? All men are abusive, and it's very normal when we get out of abuse to have some of that, there that we pull out because we're so upset and we work so very hard, to save our relationships for years and years. But the truth is there are good men out there. And I know several that, I'm one of those. I'm remarried to an amazing man. I know you're remarried, Laura, to somebody who's a great, great person. Here at ARMS, we have men on staff that are good people, and they seek to serve. I mean, they're always like, one of them's like, what can I do to help you fix your car all the time? The other one's, can I bring you tea? They really work hard at service. And so there are good men out there. We don't want to give men a bad rap, so to speak, but I think feminism sometimes takes us too far that other direction. We don't need men at all, right? I mean,
Yes,
they're all
and that's what the church is afraid of.
Yes, I think so. And that's a hard balance to come by. So I appreciate your thoughts on that. Regarding abusive relationships in step families, I was curious to know your thoughts and your opinion that if somebody has an abusive marriage and they then divorce and then one of or both, remarry into other families, and what kinds of things can drift over from that first relationship that was not, so healthy, and potentially be issues in a newer marriage that's actually fairly healthy. Have you seen that happen in the people you've worked with?
Yeah, unfortunately, the most common mistake that people make when they get out of a divorce, breakup of a serious like engagement or something, and they don't do the healing to get into the next relationship. So that is the number one mistake that people make. Everybody thinks, oh, I'm already healed. I did the work, or they attend one divorce care class and they think that's all they need. And I'm glad they did at least that. But they don't. I have to, when I speak with singles or single again, or divorce recovery groups, I often ask them, were there red flags while you were dating? And almost all of them, yes. And then I tell them this statement: if you don't discover why you ignored or tolerated the red flags, you will do it again. It'll be a different person with a different social security number. but it will be the same person.
Mhm.
Because we, by human nature, we gravitate to those same issues. It met a need in me. I thought I could rescue that person. I thought they loved me. I tolerated the abuse while we were dating, and I thought it would go away. It made me feel loved that he was so jealous. You know, there's all these mixture of reasons why we got into that relationship in the first place. And very few people take the time to discover past the adultery, past the abuse, past the addiction. You know, they'll go, well, I ended up in a divorce because my spouse committed adultery or my spouse was an addict. Yes, I get that part. But why did you ignore that when you were dating?
Mhm.
And the typical answer, well, I loved them. Well, what exactly did you love? What does that mean to you?
Mhm.
What does that loving mean to you? You got to discover that.
Mhm.
And so because so few take the time to do that, they get into another relationship, a step family usually, and they're bringing their children with them who have also been wounded by all of that. Kids do not do well in a second marriage.
Mhm.
It is the number one reason why second marriages fail is stress over the kids. And it really makes total sense. You know, you got two people bringing these kids who are wounded from the first. Now you're blending them into a second. We adults have the crazy idea that they're going to be happy to have all these additional parents. The rules are completely different in the two homes. The structure is different. The values are different. One home's Christian, the other home isn't. And we're thinking they're going to be all happy about this. And rarely the case. So what can occur, why the abuse can float over? First of all, if the person was an abuser in their last relationship, if they haven't done any work to stop being an abuser or admit that they're an abuser, they'll bring that into the next relationship because they feel it's their right. I'm not wrong. The other person is wrong.
Mhm.
The other aspect of abuse that happens in step families is very often the kids will abuse the step parent. And see, when I grew up in a divorced home, that would have never been allowed or tolerated. You know, I'm old. So you didn't treat adults like that. You weren't allowed to treat adults like that.
Mhm.
But today, it's completely different.
Mhm.
So I have tons of step parents that contact me. My stepson or my stepdaughter hits me, throws things at me, locks me out of the house, sets something of mine on fire, steals from me, calls me the F word, calls me the B word, has turned me into social services, saying I abuse them. I mean, the list is endless.
Mhm.
And so you have multifaceted abuse
Mhm.
in a step family because if the people didn't heal, they're now bringing two layers of all of this toxic behavior from the past under one roof.
Yeah.
And so now that can be healed. I mean, I'm a life coach. I work with tons of couples that are able to heal this, but they have to be willing to dig into how did you end up in this marriage?
Mhm.
Why are you tolerating this? Why are you ignoring this? Well, because I love him. Really? Really?
Yeah.
And so, and I want to be a mother to his kids. Well, that's all fine and good, but they don't need another mother. They have a mother.
Mhm.
Stop trying to be a mother.
Mhm.
Be what God's called you to be to them.
Right.
Because they're resenting you. Part of the reason that child is hitting you, throwing things at you, calling you a name, is because you're trying to replace his mother.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it's hard. Oh my gosh, step families are so complicated.
Yeah.
So I find that step families have more abuse
Mm.
than first time marriages.
Oh boy. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a struggle, but I see a trend and, I saw it in myself as well. I had more than one abusive relationship. I had three as I learned more, and I looked back at my history. And I didn't want to go there again. So I had to work incredibly hard on myself because I'm like, there is a reason that I, keep choosing these types of people. And when, like, just like you said, when the red flags come up, I'm like, oh, excusing it and saying I love him and everything else. And it's really important. And so I guess if I had a wish for people, I would just wish that they would work more on their own healing before they move on, because really, don't you want to give that second person the best of yourself, right? And to do that, dig in and heal and come to the Her Journey classes and work on devotionals. And Joyce Meyer has a good devotional out there for broken spirits of people who have been abused. Really work to find out what it is in you that you can work on in order to give your best foot forward in your next relationship. So I often work with ladies who, do decide eventually to leave their abuser. He's not making changes. She's set boundaries. She's even given ultimatums, go to a program or else or whatever. And he has chosen not to. And they do end up splitting up. And as she's healing, a few months down the road, after their divorce, she may start thinking, I didn't really like men. I was kind of, off put by them, but now, I don't want to be alone the rest of my life. Right. And so then they go back on that track of looking for another relationship before they're actually ready to do so. And I do see that affect the kids, as well, obviously. These two sides of the family were never asking to lose their other parent and never asking this parent to get remarried. And that can be a huge struggle. So what do you recommend for those families that are, let's say they're already married a second time and the relationship is healthy, but they have stuff in the past they've got to work on and it is now affecting the kids? You mentioned that's the number one reason why second marriages don't work out. That's amazing. That's incredible. So what can be done? I mean, what's some preliminary things that one could do in that kind of relationship to make it as successful as possible?
Yes. Well, I do life coaching for people pre-marriage, before they walk down the aisle with that. And I usually have some questionnaires that I have them, look at and ask themselves. And if they'll answer it honestly, how often is this a conflict? How intrusive is the former spouse? Mm-hmm. Does the former spouse intrude into your home or into your space? Or, now they're the mother or father of the children. So you have to have a respect for them, even if you don't like them or you don't like how they parent. Mm-hmm. But if they feel they're allowed to dictate things in your home, that's going to be an issue. So things like that. But really, I think my clients are very shocked that I ask them a lot of questions about their previous marriage. Mm. And it is very interesting because the men rarely can answer the questions. Mm. The women, about 50% of the time, can say, I ignored this, or I did this, or I had an affair, or I was wounded from my childhood, or this, and this. Mm-hmm. The men will say, I really have no idea why our marriage ended. Or she just grew tired, or she had an affair, or, we used to fight a lot. The men almost never, I can name maybe 5 that were able to answer that question effectively, efficiently, on why their previous marriage ended. So let's just start with that for a minute. If you haven't done a deep dive into what really happened there, and see, they all think I just married the wrong person.
Right.
I just married the wrong person.
Common mentality. Yes.
Yes, exactly. And to be honest, that's an easy answer. It's what society tells us. Most of your family is just, oh, you just married. I didn't like her anyway. I didn't like him anyway. You get all that. And so you just develop this, well, it'll be different this time. Mm-hmm. But if you're no different this time, chances are it won't be different this time. You may have different issues, but you're going to have issues because you didn't address what was broken in the first place. It's like building a house on a piece of cement that's all cracked and broken. Mm-hmm. And so when they work with me, they have to do the work to do a deep dive. Mm-hmm. And many do not want to do that. Mm-hmm. Because it's painful, it's time consuming, it feels too emotional, especially for the guys. Like my husband hates these questions, absolutely hates these questions. He'd rather have a root canal. And it's not even so much because he doesn't want to share it. It's that his brain, like, I don't know. I don't know how I felt about that. I don't know what I was thinking. So I get it that the guys think differently.
Right.
But so then I'm able to talk to them about, do you understand that your fiance is concerned about such and such? That you allow your daughter to do such and such is very troubling to her. Do you understand that? Do you know that that is going to cause a problem in your marriage? And so it's pressing in with these really, really deep questions that we're trying to sweep under the rug, because we just think if we get remarried again, we found the right person and we're happy and we both love Jesus. It's worse for Christians because we add the Jesus factor and that causes us to ignore even more stuff. So now the good news is, because we have Jesus, we have a source to go to heal, to teach us how to heal.
Amen.
But so that is going into that deep dive. The number one mistake in pre-marriage that a lot of these couples do is they go to their pastors for pre-marriage counseling, coaching, pre-marriage class, and they do material that is geared for first-time marriages.
Yeah. Yep.
It is a huge mistake. Huge mistake. Because they're addressing things that are not the pressing issues for a stepfamily. Stepfamily has completely, radically different issues before the marriage. Yes, we have to learn how to love each other. Yes, we have to learn how to respect each other. But that is not, it would be like you getting in an accident and needing a tourniquet to keep your arm, your arm's bleeding and you need a tourniquet to keep the blood flow, to keep you from dying. And, a paramedic comes along or a person comes along and they're trying to put a Band-Aid on your forehead that's got a little scratch on it. And you're like, no, the tourniquet, I'm bleeding. My artery has been severed and I'm going to bleed to death.
Right.
And see, in the church, what we do is we put the Band-Aid on the little wound up here with the love and respect topics. And because either we don't know we're gushing blood from the arm that's been severed, or because we don't know how.
Right.
We just assume if I give them the principles of marriage, this marriage will survive. We don't know they need a completely different toolbox. The utensils you use to keep a first marriage together and the utensils you use to keep a second marriage together are radically different.
Right.
And so it's getting help from someone who is a step-family expert. And that name is thrown around a lot today, especially on social media. They take one life coaching class or something and they labeled, I see tons of bad advice on the internet for stepfamilies and stepmoms in particular. So you want to make sure it's somebody that really knows their stuff. I have 4 books on this subject. All you have to do is read one of them and you'll know whether I'm a fit for you or not.
Yeah, it's good to have those resources. We appreciate that. Is that on your list? I mean, is that something that's needed? It sounds like curriculum for, premarital counseling, that when it's actually a second marriage instead of the first. Is there resources out there? Is that something that needs to be done?
Yeah, in my book, The Smart Stepmom, I do talk all about that. These are the issues you should discuss before you get married. I have 2 chapters in the middle of the book for the wife and the husband to do together. Okay. So that would be the 2 fiancés. If they did nothing else, but just do those 2 chapters together, that would help them. And even if you're not going to become a stepmom, if it's a stepdad, it works just the same. The principles are exactly the same. Okay. And some of the issues that bother a woman and that bother a man are like stepmoms struggle with the ex-wife more than stepdads struggle with the ex-husband. It's the female like cat fight thing that we women can get into. And
Okay.
I'm embarrassed to say it, but it's so true. Where men can kind of like, I don't care if he comes to the football game or not. You
Mhm,
know, I don't care if your ex comes to the baseball game of little Johnny. He can
mhm.
come. I don't care. He can sit in the same row as me. I don't care. Where women get, oh, you know, we think she's going to be skinnier than me.
Right.
And so we're all worried about that.
Mhm,
And so, and we're afraid that our spouse might still have some feelings for her,
mhm,
especially if she's the one that, see, men don't normally think like that.
mhm,
And so this is why stepmom resources are more popular, because
mhm.
women think more about these things.
Right.
But so yes, reading a resource like that, and it is a Christian resource, so I give lots of biblical tools in there about how to pray and how to go to God about these things, um, and discussing all of that and resolving a lot of it. Like, if you're not resolving this, like if he thinks it's okay for his kids to be on their iPhone 24/7
Mhm,
and look at whatever they want to look at,
mhm,
and you don't,
mhm,
you really need to think whether you should be marrying this person or not.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Because if that is going to drive you crazy
Mhm.
and you're going to nag him for the rest of your life, why are you letting them look at the phone?
Right.
It's his child.
Right.
And so, and I just want to add in there, when I talk about step families struggling, people think it's just the young kids that cause the second marriage.
Yeah. No.
It's not.
I can vouch for that.
Adult step kids are just as complicated as the little ones,
Yeah.
sometimes even more.
Yes. Yeah. All ages. All
Yeah,
ages, even when they're out of the house, it,
right.
are affected in such a way. So, and speaking of that iPhone thing, I have one more question for you, and that is that we have a lot of people that were in abuse and have left the abuse, said no to abuse, and now they have to co-parent with their abuser. And this person who is their abuser has not maybe been physically abusive, so therefore the law does not recognize it as domestic violence. But there's been emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, financial abuse, animal abuse, all those things are in that component. And now we have to
Yeah,
co-parent with this person and send our kids whenever, every weekend or whatever, to dad's house. I have found some value in teaching women how to teach their kids boundaries as their kids get a little older and are able to do so. But there could also be some danger in that. And when they're small, of course, they're not going to be able to do that. And so we still see a lot of post separation abuse, especially in the co parenting, and worry about our kids. So, what advice would you have as far as people dealing with co parenting with their abuser?
that's the hardest part of what I do.
Okay.
It's the
I'm
hard,
glad it's not just me. you know.
it's the hardest part of what I do, because I am a child of divorce.
Mhm,
And so I know what it was like to be between the two homes.
mhm,
I know what it's like to want to please your parents.
mhm,
I'm a big people pleaser.
mhm,
And I didn't know that I was until I was really into my 40s. I didn't know I was a codependent and an enabler because I have such a strong personality. You'd think I'd just be a bully, but I'm really not. I'm a codependent. And it's all about control.
mhm,
And so I totally understand the child that doesn't want to say no to their parent, that, and they're going to do that more with the parent that is unstable.
mhm,
They're going to do that more, that letting them get away with things to earn their love, to win their love, to, it's the parent that's absent or neglectful or abusive that the child is going to be more willing to do because they're desperate. I'll take any little crumbs of love you will give me. And if that means I have to watch movies that mom wouldn't want me to watch, I'll do it. If
mhm,
that means saying things I know are wrong, I'll do it. If that means it is a child's mind is totally different than an adult mind. And so, yes, the parent in the home that is stable and hopefully godly
mhm,
is the primary residence, or even the home that is giving the child the most stability. that home has to be filled with so much prayer that you could almost feel the Holy Spirit in there,
Mhm.
because you cannot control what goes on in the other home. Unless it is illegal
Mhm.
and you have the money to get an attorney or to file if it's serious enough. And you see in our society, things are less and less and less serious.
Mhm.
The things that my mother could have maybe gone to court for and been taken seriously, radically different than what a mother could do today, where a judge is going to go, that is no big deal, darling, just let it go. You can't control that in the other home. And so, because so many more kids are off the rails, because there's so much more mental illness, because there is so much more children on psychotropic medications that are affecting how they think, you see, this problem has just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. But it's not bigger than God. So your greatest weapon is to be praying nonstop for that child when they are in the other home. This is why you need a church. This is why you need a church body, because you need to recruit others who, while that child is in that home, they will be praying for your child to keep them from harm, keep them from seeing things they shouldn't, seeing people they shouldn't be around. My two nieces used to have to go to their mom's house when they were little. And you can ask any of my friends, I used to pray like a crazy woman when those two little girls were over at their mom's house, because I knew it was not a safe environment. And I couldn't control it, but I would give them my phone number. This is before cell phones. I would, like, if you're scared, if you need something, now you need to be careful with that, because kids get scared just because they're not in the bed that they're familiar with. And so it's that fine line of teaching the child, and again, in an age appropriate manner. It is okay, honey, to say no. You don't, if you don't want to watch that movie with daddy, it's okay to say, daddy, that scares me. I don't want to watch that. Or daddy, I don't like that person. I don't, when your friend Joey comes over, I don't like being around him. It's okay to tell your daddy that. And so coaching them in that manner of what it's okay to say no to is part of it. It's also very important that the parent get extremely educated on the minds of children of trauma. My favorite resource is a non-Christian resource called Between Two Worlds by Elizabeth Marquardt. Between Two Worlds by Elizabeth Marquardt. This will help the parent learn what the child's mind is thinking, because frequently kids say things that are different than what they're really thinking, because they don't know how to process that emotion. It comes out, they could be very upset with something and say, my stomach hurts, my tummy hurts. The kid who's physically sick all the time, my tummy hurts. Well, that's because they don't know how to say, when I'm over at dad's, I have to watch a movie with monsters and I hate it. They don't know how to do that. So a parent needs to become very educated on what is the proper way to parent when the child is in their home. And my co-author, Ron Deal, has a fabulous book called Single Parenting and Dating. So that's a really good resource too, to learn about what your kid's thinking, what's scaring them, what isn't scaring them. It's also important to learn how to talk about your faith in your home, in particular if daddy's home is, well, that's okay. You know that daddy and I have different beliefs about that. I'm sorry that daddy is telling you that Jesus isn't true, isn't real. I'm sorry. I am so sorry that the divorce has put you in that situation where you're hearing one thing in our home and another thing in daddy's home. That must be so confusing for you. I'm so sorry. But I want you to know that mommy's telling you that Jesus is real. He does love you. And it's okay that you don't talk about that when you go to daddy's house. If you don't want to bring that up or you don't want to talk about that, that's okay. You don't have to bring that up. You don't ever bash the parent. You don't ever say, oh, your daddy's such a sinner, pagan sinner. He's going straight to hell because he doesn't believe in Jesus. And this is what so many parents do, is they badmouth that parent for those things. And all that does is cause the child to feel badly about themselves. It confuses them more.
Mhm.
And so you need to be your child's best cheerleader on how it's okay to have a different view at daddy's home or talk about different things at daddy's home. Now, obviously, if the child's coming home and saying, daddy's showing me pictures of naked women, okay, now we got a legal issue here.
Right. Yeah.
And make sure in your budget, here's something I'd like to tell those women. Make sure in your budget, you have a budget for legal advice.
Okay.
Make sure you have money in your budget for therapy.
Mhm.
Whatever you have to do to get money in those two categories, when I say whatever you have to do, I mean within reason.
Right.
You know, if you're going to borrow money for something, or if you're going to, don't go out and buy a new car. That's not what your kid needs. Your kid needs a lawyer and a therapist.
Mhm.
And if so many single parents, in particular single moms, their finances are drained so badly. If your parents are willing to help with someone, if your church is willing to help with something, that's where to invest the money.
Mhm.
Is getting legal help to protect them, because sometimes that is what you need to do, is go to court and say, and you've got to have proof.
Mhm.
And there's where, don't go on social media and ask
Right.
other women, how do I take my husband to court?
Right.
They're not lawyers. So get that advice directly from a professional who can answer that. Drives me nuts when people go on social media to get legal advice.
Yeah.
Like, seriously? Number one,
Keeping in mind that there are attorneys on social media.
no, I'm not saying you can't hire an attorney through social media.
Right.
I'm talking about getting advice from another woman that's going through a divorce that isn't an attorney.
Yes, got it.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, there can be a lot of, colluded information there. I agree. And at the same time, we do see in our industry a lot of people very focused on the narcissism that occurred and the negative, 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 negative. And he always did this. And of course, he's a narcissist, so he always is going to do this, versus focusing on themselves, and their healing. And I've seen that take women backwards, in their healing, and stop their healing when their focus is on their partner and not on themselves. So those are important points. Thank you for the resources. That was helpful.
Yes.
I will add like a book cover in with the video, so people have that as a resource. As we wrap up, do you want to tell us about any current projects you're working on or what's planned in the future?
I do. Well, first, this came to me after I just made that statement. So I do want to add this. Make sure you're praising your former spouse, the child's parent.
Yikes. Yeah.
In ways that you can. You know what, Johnny? Look at how good you are in math. You know what? Your dad's really great at math. That's where you got that from, was your dad. Oh, Susie, you are a fabulous speller. Look at you, got all 10 of your spelling words right. Did you know that your mom used to win spelling bees when she was, find the things that are good about your ex and praise them in front of your child.
Yeah.
And don't ever throw away your photographs.
That is never taking the higher road.
Ever throw away the photographs.
Yeah.
If you're tempted to burn them or throw them away, give them to a family member to hold them for you. Okay. So I just had to throw that little piece.
Thank you. I appreciate your thoughts.
Yes, I am currently working on a project and have been working on a project for a little while now. I keep getting stopped with other things called Step Families of the Bible. And so what I'm doing, the Bible is jam-packed with step families, but we rarely hear the church talk about that. So I take the step families that are primarily in the Old Testament. Jesus himself was in a step family. So he is a New Testament person that's in a step family. But a lot of these families of old, And I am using their stories, their emotions, the good they did, the bad they did, the way they handled things, the way they should have handled things.
Mhm.
It's amazing how so many of them parallel many of the issues that step families face today.
Wow.
And so I'm putting that in a book and correlating that and going to make that available. I'm hoping by the end of this year. I am working diligently. I've decided I got to go take 3-4 days and just go get by myself
Yeah.
and work on it. So yeah, that's what I'm working on is Step Families of the Bible. And it's really for anybody. It doesn't, you don't have to be in a step family. You could even be, I have some kids that are their parents, are step families, and they're like, I want to read that. So yeah, it's really for anybody. And I'm excited about it because there's nothing out there like it.
No, I'm really excited to read it because, you and I talked a little bit a couple weeks ago and you said the same thing. There's so many step families in the Bible. And I was like, huh? Because, we don't think of it that way. It's not necessarily remarriage. It's the fact that they had many wives, and there were
Right.
many situations that were more of a community, or had, the same dad for many kids. And so, yeah, I'm excited to read it. I'll be happy to read that. My latest project that I'm working on along the same veins is actually a devotional journal for healing from abuse, mostly from intimate partner abuse. I think it's going to be called
Oh,
Broken
yes.
Souls Restored. And every chapter is a question or problem that we struggle with, as we're going through these things and how I addressed it in my life as well as other examples. And then we also point out, of course, Bible verses that are applied. And then there's a journaling area as well for people who want to work more on their healing. So that's a common
Oh, I
question
can't
here. We
wait to
have
see
gals that take her journey classes and they're like, what else can I do? What else? Because they're so anxious to heal, and to move forward in a healthy manner.
Yes.
So I'm working on that. So here at ARMS, just so you all know, it stands for Abuse Recovery Ministry and Services. We have free Her Journey groups for survivors who are women, and actually it's appropriate for ages 14 and up. So even for teenagers who have been in abuse or are in abuse. And they are nationwide and virtual, as well as in Kenya and Canada, getting ready to start in Australia, very exciting. And Mexico as well has been up and going with this program. It was completely life-saving for me and my situation and validating and so helpful for many women that I know of. So check it out if you get a chance. Our website is simply abuserecovery.org. And Laura's website is thesmartstepmom.com. She has a ton of resources on it. I highly recommend you grab one of her books, especially if you're in a step family or part of a step family, that it can be very helpful. And I look forward to reading the new one. So very exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for coming. I so appreciate your time. You're actually our very first guest for this type of show that we're starting. So you have an honored position there, and maybe we can revisit again in 6 months or so and see how it's going.
I'd love that.
All right.